Sophie Andrews had created an award-winning, highly successful bookkeeping business. She was a pioneer in the niching space in this industry. Her background in fashion and gemstones in the UK led itself brilliantly to her focusing on the needs of people in creative fields, and the business flourished. But after 15 years of dedication, the demands began to take their toll, physically and emotionally. Sophie's priorities had shifted. She was becoming bored. The desire for the work was no longer there. And to be honest, she knew that burnout was waiting just around the corner. It was time for significant change. But as many of us realize, letting go of the known to step into the unknown can be really hard. But the great news is it can also be hugely rewarding in so many ways that are hard to imagine right now. In this conversation, Sophie and I talk about reframing our thoughts, letting go of old stories that keep us stuck, and choosing to swap striving for space so new ideas can make themselves heard. I'm sure you're going to enjoy this conversation. My name is Angela Raspis. I'm a business mentor, author, and self-worth educator. And you're listening to Your Next Chapter, a podcast about change and challenges, goals, and dreams, and the mix of strategy and self-worth it takes to step into the next version of you. I know I say this about a lot of people that I bring onto the podcast, how excited and delighted I am to talk with them. And it's always true, because to me, the power of example, of hearing someone else's story, there's so often a nugget of gold within it that makes you go, hey, maybe it's possible for me as well. And our gorgeous guest today, Sophie Andrews, look, I reckon we're two peas in a pod. And why is that? Because both of us realized that the business, the very successful business that we'd created, was eating away at our souls, and we had to make a change. But sometimes that type of change, when something's actually working on the outside but doesn't feel so hot on the inside, sometimes that's the hardest change to make, which is why I am indeed delighted and excited to welcome Sophie to the show today. Hello, my darling.
Hi, how are you?
Alive and kicking, and really pleased that we're able to take a conversation that you and I have often had offline, online, so that we can share it with other people as well.
Yeah, really looking forward to it. Thanks for having me on.
You're most welcome. Well, this is all about chapters, next chapters, old chapters, previous chapters, etc., etc. So it'll be wonderful to hear, where were you, Soph, before you decided, I don't want to be in this place anymore? Tell us the backstory.
Yeah, look, I'd had a business for 15, 16 years, and it was a business that I'd started never to, like, I didn't have a plan. It wasn't that I sat down one day and went, this is a business I really want to start. It was just, I'd been retrenched by a couple of companies and I wanted more control over my life and freedom. And it was just the easiest business to start. And so, and then it just kind of kept growing and growing and growing. And it turned into this, very successful, award-winning business. But, it was never my passion. And for a long time, it didn't matter so much because I actually loved business. And I had a bookkeeping firm, and about 2 or 3 years into it, I repositioned the business so that we were specialising in dealing with people in the creative space, which was my background. Previously, I'd worked in the gemstone industry for about 10 years. And so for a long time, just the fact that I was in business, I loved, and the fact that I was dealing with really interesting clients was great, but the actual business itself wasn't my passion, if that makes sense. And so I just became more and more burnt out, and it probably started, I reckon, about 5 years into the business. So I spent about a decade really burnt out, and, to the point where taking 4 to 6 weeks off, sitting and doing nothing just didn't make me feel any better at all. I started having physical issues as a result of it. And yeah, that's kind of where I was. I was in this business that, like you say, outwardly was very successful. We were winning awards. We were, I think, the year before I left that business, we were finalists in 5 or 6 awards that year for our industry awards. But it was absolutely killing me. I was so burnt out by it. That's pretty much where I was.
Yeah, and I hear that really clearly. There's a couple of things I want to pick up on and just explore that you mentioned there. One of the comments that you made was it was the easiest business to start. Now, one of the things that I've often seen when I've worked with people, and I saw it in myself, is that often when we go, you know what, the corporate world or whatever our scenario is, isn't right for us. What are my skills? Okay, they're these. So I'll start this business. With me, my background was marketing and events and sponsorships and sales. So ergo, I'll be a freelance marketing consultant. So that was the easiest business for me to start because all I needed was a laptop and a business card. So from your perspective, what made the bookkeeping business so easy to start?
Yeah, look, I mean, originally my degree was in languages. So I lived over in the UK. Came to Australia in my early to mid-20s, but European languages here, it wasn't something that was needed. And so, back in the UK, I'd worked for the Trade Association for the gemstone industry. I'd done a lot of translating work, but that didn't translate, pun on words, to the market here in Australia. And so I ended up still in the gemstone industry, but I kind of morphed into the finance area. And that only really happened because I was just really good at maths, I guess. Yeah. And picked it up quite quickly. And so when I started the business, I'd had a couple of retrenchments. My daughter was around 2. I'd just gone through a divorce. My daughter had been born really preemie. So it was a period of kind of a lot of stress and having that control over my future was something that was really important. And it was just the easiest thing to start. I didn't have to invest any money. It was something I could pick up really easy. I just, went round and put a few flyers out and just sort of gradually picked up clients. So it was never a conscious, and I think back then, my headspace was very much in survival and earning money rather than what do I really want to do with my life.
I think that's a really important discernment there, is that when we're at different stages of life, different values rise to the surface. And at that stage, like taking care of yourself and your daughter and like getting everything in place and feeling secure was most important. And bookkeeping is an essential an essential service that a lot of people need. So that made perfect sense that was the path that you went down. And then you said another thing, which I found really interesting, was even after, so I think it was about 5 years, that you made that the pivot or the pirouette, as we say here, into recognizing, okay, I've got this skill base. Okay, it's working. It's not floating my boat completely, and so you found one way in which you could like restructure in the sense, or refocus in bringing yourself back to that niche of the creative industries. I think that's a great example of just thinking a little bit outside the box of, okay, if I can't make a major change to the actual structure of the business and what I'm doing in terms of a service, I instead can focus in on providing that service to an industry niche that really appeals to me. So how did that go? How did that feel? How did you make that particular change?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I just was finding the business really boring, to be honest. I'm much more of a creative person who just happens to be good at maths. And I was just bored. And I'd started another business, the Soho agency, which I think I knew back in those days, Ange. And and literally about 3 months after launching that, my bookkeeping business just kind of exploded, and so I had to put that to the side. And like I say, for a long time, the actual running of a business and coming up with marketing ideas, that kind of thing, really kind of sustained me. But I was just totally bored, and so I thought, well, look, it's a good business, it's a good business model. What can I do to change it? And having come from that creative background, we were probably one of the first in our industry. I think there was maybe one other firm that had niched at that point, but certainly in the bookkeeping space, we would have been one of the first that really niched in a particular area. So it worked really well for that reason, that no one else was really doing it. And traditionally, the finance space wasn't particularly exciting or creative thinking. And so, we were able to really stand out, which just worked really well. These days it would maybe be a bit harder because there's so many there's so much innovation in that space now. I think it will be trickier, but it was just a well-timed pivot.
It absolutely was. That actually, or pirouette, thank you. It actually begs the question, what is the difference, in your opinion, between an entrepreneur and a business owner? Do you feel that the entrepreneur is leaning more into the creative part versus the ability to actually put the business together?
It's a really interesting question, because I know plenty of really creative, innovative business owners who are great entrepreneurs in the sense that they can come up with brilliant ideas and niches, and they're great at marketing and that kind of thing. But can they run a good business? Like, do they have those really basic business skills? I don't know that all of them do. And vice versa, there are people who are very kind of very task focused and very able to, just able to really focus on that business, but perhaps they're not the most creative of thinkers, and they do incredibly well. So I don't know the answer to that question. I think you need a mix of both. And I think that, certainly in my case, I was able to grow the business to a point that I was comfortable with because I could think creatively and strategically, and I also had enough business, basic business knowledge. But then I know for me personally, and I'm sure this is the same for other people, I got to a point where I had a stack of staff, and I realised that actually, whilst I had a lot of business skills, managing staff was not one of them. I was very much, I wanted all my staff to be my friends, and I wasn't very good at putting those boundaries in place. And, it worked for a while, but then it kind of backfired. But so I think you need both, to be honest.
It's interesting hearing you talk about the managing staff. Honestly, if I had $5 for every person that I've worked with who said, I love what I do, but growing, that means I have to manage staff, and I'm just, or I'm managing staff now, and So it's like, it's staff management, it's cash flow, and it's marketing. Those are the three areas which are what I've seen all over the years that I've worked with people that are the real sticking points. And the reason I ask the question is because I do see you, like I've known you for a wee while, so from the outside looking in, you have that beautiful blend of both the entrepreneurial and the business owner skills, and I do see them as different. And I do feel that people who have that creative bent do have a tendency to, after a while, go, next, because you're used to it and it becomes a little bit mundane, and another person might look at a way to expand what's working well, where sometimes people with the creative stroke entrepreneurial spirit go, I don't want to expand and make it run better. I actually want to do this other thing over here that's calling me.
Yeah, I think certainly for a lot of us, it's, we very much enjoy innovation and new things and constant growth, and to be constantly growing when you're in one business for a long period of time, you can get to the point where you kind of do stop growing. And so, but I think also a lot of entrepreneurs are, they're big picture visionaries. So they're great at coming up with the concept and the idea for a business or a niche. They love getting it up and running and off the ground. But then once it comes, because they're such big picture, they're not kind of those detail people. I know this was certainly true of me, and you kind of get to that point where it's like the business, okay, you've launched it, you've done all the marketing, it's up and running, it's out there. But then to have to get involved in the nitty gritty kind of routine of running it every day, it just doesn't it doesn't inspire or excite you.
I remember the expression, or the way that I looked at it when I was moving away from my agency and the staff that I had. It's like, when you want to, not every single day because it's not possible, but most days you want to wake up and feel excited about going to work. I mean, there is a lot of demands on us, a lot of things we need to do to become a business owner, stroke entrepreneur, whatever title you like to take. And if you're going to go through all of those sacrifices in many ways and risks in other ways and not even enjoy it, then what the hell are we doing it for? And
exactly.
So when I was waking up in the morning and going, oh my God, I don't want to, or I don't like the boss, and the boss was me,
Yeah.
I knew that something had to change. And it's, I think, another question that is, there's a few alleys that I want to go down here, but one of them, just to start with, is the idea about what role does a business play in our life? Do we make a decision? Is this going to be, and this is a question for you as you're creating businesses, do you think actively about, okay, what role do I want to wrap my life around the business, or do I want to fit the business around my life? What role does it play overall? And knowing that you'd move from that stage of really wanting that security and that safety when you had your young daughter to being at a different stage of life now, does that influence the role that the business plays for you?
I think for me, work has always been part of life. Like, I don't see the two as separate. If I'm working on a new business idea or, whatever, I kind of live and breathe it, I guess. I suppose it's the same for any business owner, like it's not like where you've got a job where you get to 5 o'clock or 5:30 and that's it. You don't have to think about it until the next day. So I find that it's kind of one and the same, if that makes sense.
I think I relate entirely to the idea that I can't switch my brain off at 5 o'clock. My husband is a business owner as well. And we actually just went away for 4 days up to the Hunter Valley. And I was driving up and saying, we should forbid ourselves from talking about our businesses for the next 4 days. And he looked aghast, like, how could we do that? You can't switch off that part of your brain. And that is a reality. I absolutely agree with that. And I guess another part to the question is the question of what's enough.
Yeah.
What's enough?
Look, I think it's an interesting one. I know that I got to a point a few years ago where I sat down one day and I went, hold on a minute. Every single friend that I have is a business owner. And when we meet, we talk about business. We talk about other things, but like 80% of what we talk about is business related. And just that realization that's probably not balanced. But I kind of I just wasn't, I was completely out of touch with how to have a conversation with someone that was about other stuff, where business didn't come into it because it was such a massive part of my life. So that was in the days, at the peak of it all and the peak of the burnout where I was so out of balance. Yeah.
Yeah, and if we have that awareness, there was actually one of the other lovely ladies I'm speaking to in this podcast season. It was the concept of life integration and how we actually integrate the different areas of our life so that we do get a well-rounded, I don't even use, to be honest, the expression balanced, because to balance something, you got to be holding it still. You can't be racing around and holding it. And I don't want to stand still. I want to be moving and growing and trying new things in my world. But if you look at that integration pie, so to speak, and 3/4 of it is business, and and 1/5 of that is friends, etc., then things aren't well integrated. So the idea of what role does the business play in your life, it's a different answer for everybody. For some people, it's like this is absolutely full time. This is my passion. I'm living my work. And I'm not judging that in any sort of a way. It's an observation where another person can say, well, look, this is a side hobby. This is a bit of a side hustle, or this is, and they put the sort of boundaries in place that allows them to create a business that works with their life. So they're not like enslaved to it. I believe a business should serve you just as much as you serve your clients. And I guess with you making the move away from what you recognized wasn't serving you, it was burning the hell out of you, is a great example of that discernment. This is not serving me anymore, creatively or physically or emotionally as well.
Yeah. I think for me, my friends were well aware for a number of years that I was just over it. But I felt completely and utterly trapped. We had, 150 plus clients. I had a team of staff, I had a big expensive office. My name was very much associated with the business. And, friends would say to me, just sell it, and I'd say, I can't. The clients would leave. I just felt so trapped by it. And look, honestly, for me, I reckon, What actually happened for me is that I went on a meditation retreat was up in the jungles of Bali, and I did a lot of meditation, a lot of spiritual work. And I came back, and 24 hours after I came back, I just woke up one morning and I just said, that's it, I'm selling. And I feel like I'd almost left it to the point where, you know how sometimes where you put off making a decision and then you get to the point where you actually just don't care anymore, and it becomes a non-negotiable that you have to get out, whether that's a relationship or it's a business or whatever it is. You're kind of beyond logical thinking. And I think I was at a point where if I hadn't have decided to sell, then I probably would have just not gone into work one day and just disappeared, to be honest. Like I was at that point. And I was just incredibly lucky that within 3 months I found the ideal buyer, and, you know, it just all worked beautifully. But you know, I did very much feel incredibly trapped by the business, like there was no way out. And I think part of that is because I'd let my brain get to such a point that it was so overwhelmed, there was no space to think clearly. You know, and you tell yourself repeatedly what you think is true. And so I kept telling myself, there's no way out. And so that kind of had become my reality. I couldn't see past that.
That is such a great point. This idea that we get ourselves stuck in a story loop. And because we are so immersed in the situation, it's almost impossible unless you completely change your surroundings or have this new experience like you did in Bali to be able to rise up above it or to sit alongside it and see it from a different angle. So that was a great decision to give yourself that space. That's what we need, is that space and that grace. It's not surprising that the business you've moved into has some tentacles in that area. But I guess one of the things that I've often seen, and I wrote about this in my recent book, was what I call the discontent continuum, where, you know, at one end you're vaguely irritated and not that happy, to the other end where you're like a screaming nightmare, I've got to get out of this. It's just and it feels like you traversed that continuum and then leapt out at the right time. Did you have any doubts about an ability to begin again, to start something new? I understand the trapped feeling, but and there was good reasons for that. But what about the feelings in the back of your head? Because I experienced that, well, if I let this go, I'll look as though I failed. I couldn't cut the mustard.
Yeah.
You know, oh my God, I'm 42. That was back then. That was 10 years ago. How am I going to start again? Like all of this, there's those stories that you were referring to before. I had my own set running around in my head. What happened with you with that self-doubt piece?
Yeah, look, I guess there's a couple of points to that. One was I absolutely felt like a failure in that I, you know, had spent 15 years growing this business. It was high profile. I had sat on the board of directors of the trade association for 5 years. You know, like we'd won a lot of awards. We were well known, and there was a part of me, because when I sold the business, you know, to have taken that business through pretty big growth for a number of years, the business had incurred various debts and loans, and so when I actually sold the business, once all that was paid off, there actually really wasn't that much left over, and so I definitely had feelings of failure that, you know, I hadn't ended up with a stack of money in the bank. And it was actually a very dear friend of mine who helped me with that. She said to me, not all businesses are built for that purpose. You know, your business, its purpose was to take you through those years as a single parent, to enable you to put your daughter through school, to be able to take trips back to Europe, see your family. And now you're in a different place in your life. That business is no longer there. It doesn't need to serve you in that way anymore. And so I was able to look at it very differently and actually be grateful to what that business had given me over the years, as opposed to resentful that, you know, it hadn't ended up where I think a lot of us expect our businesses are going to end up.
That's such a beautiful reframe. And this is, I think, partially tied into the question that I was asking before, as a question for everyone, is about what's the role that you want the business to play in your life. And that recognition, that awareness that it did a bloody good job. And we don't have to, that singular idea is that the purpose of a business is to provide a return on shareholders' investment, even if you're the only shareholder. That is not the only yardstick that we can be measuring by.
Yeah, exactly.
I look at the time, within the agency. For me, the highest goal for me was flexibility. I needed and wanted and highly valued flexibility because my kids had different things going on at school. There was different stuff in my life. And I've often reflected with my husband, imagine if I'd had to ask a boss for all of the time that I have taken, inverted commas, off to be places that I wanted and needed to be for my family, as well as have a business that makes me feel good. So I think that's a beautiful reframe. And I think it's a point that is worth people pausing and having a think about that. What is the role this business is playing? And I'm not downplaying money, because I hugely believe it's contribution, fulfillment, financial reward. Those are the three pieces, that are over the top, the umbrella direction over the top of any business. And so I like money. I love what I can do with it. I love the doors that it opens, but it can't be the only thing. So I love that reframe. That must have, you must have just, I don't know, stepped a little happier out the door the next day when you'd managed to tackle that.
Yeah, it totally made me look at it differently. And, like I say, I was so resentful of the stress and the overwhelm and everything of the years that I'd been through. And I was probably, I was blaming the business for that, instead of it allowed me to look at the business and just be really thankful for it, and for what it had given me over those years. But the other thing that I did do when I left the business, I sold and moved on, is I sold about 85% of the business, and I kept some clients because I knew I wanted to do something else, but I also knew that I was so burnt out that coming up with a good idea was going to take me a while. And so I didn't want to feel pressurized by financial constraints to come up with something too quickly. I wanted to give myself time to, still have those clients that I kept, to be earning an income, and just to take the time it needed to come up with something new.
That's incredibly wise. I call that investor clients. So you have clients who are investing in you whilst you take the time to discover the next thing. It's exactly what I did when I closed the marketing agency as well. I took about 5 clients in total with me, and one of them I still have today. But that just gave you the breathing space. Yeah. I think sometimes when we're starting something new, we can put so much pressure on a fledgling new business idea, not just on ourselves, but on the business itself. We want it to be fulfilling, and we want it to make money, and we want it to make a difference, and the poor little thing's back gets broken before it's really, learn to walk. Well, with all that understanding of where you'd been and that reframing of the story that you could tell yourself, talk to us about how you went forward into these new ideas and the business that you are beautifully immersed in today.
Yeah, it was a really interesting process. So I sold the business. I stayed working in it for a few months, 3 months, and then I jumped on a plane, actually a few planes, and I took about 4 months out overseas, and just completely switched off. And I think I thought that after that I'd be completely refreshed and I would be raring to go, but it's not really what happened. I think, we can underestimate what years of burnout, how long it actually takes to get over that.
To recoup, yeah.
Yeah. And, by that point I'd been doing meditation and breath work for, 2 or 3 years. So I'd already done a lot of work, but there was probably still another year to 18 months. It was probably about another year actually, where I would sit there and I would write lists of all the things that I loved, all the things that I thought I wanted in a business, what I didn't want, and tried to come up with the ideal kind of business concept from a logical mind. I just became increasingly frustrated because I was getting nowhere. Like I'd come up with I could always come up with a million different business ideas, but they just didn't feel right. And it didn't matter how much I tried to write lists and pros and cons of different types of businesses. The right thing just wasn't coming to me. And actually it was a couple of months into COVID, and I'd taken a week out. I'd driven up to the hinterland with my daughter, and just, we just kind of did nothing for a week. And it was when I was away that the concept just came out of nowhere. And what was really interesting is when I looked at the concept and the new business, and I looked at those original lists, the answer was obvious, but I couldn't get to it from a logical place. Like, it really had to come from the heart and from me just allowing that space into my brain to let it come up, if that makes sense.
Oh my goodness, it makes an incredible amount of sense. I mean, we are conditioned to strive and to think it and work it out and get to it. But it makes me laugh, actually, because when I was meditating this morning on my beautiful meditation cushion with my lovely Afghan throw around me, etc., etc., at this stage, I'm just using the Daily Calm app, though that will be changing in ways in the future. And a little picture that came up, and they always give you an image at the end of doing that meditation. And it was a quote from Albert Einstein, where it says, "I think 99 times and find nothing. I stop thinking, swim in silence, and the truth comes to me."
Yeah, it's so true. It's one of the beautiful things about meditation is that you start getting, the more you do it, you start getting these little kind of insights that come out of nowhere that just pop into your brain. And often it's the answers to questions that you've been thinking about so hard to try and figure out, and you're just not getting the answers. And then, through meditation, and it might be half an hour after you've meditated or an hour after whatever, or the next day, but it's like this kind of droplet of the answer that you've been looking for just kind of appears out of nowhere, because you've created that space in your brain to allow those ideas and thoughts and whatever it is to come through.
And so it just appears, but it appears because your lovely brain has finally been given the opportunity to play.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so when that idea dropped in, how has it turned into what you have today?
Look, it was a really good example of being in complete flow. And, there's such a difference between launching a business and it kind of being a struggle and you're running around and trying to get everything done. Whereas this was, it was really interesting because it was 100% flow. So from the day that I came up with the concept to the day I actually launched, I think it was a 3-month period. And the whole process of coming up with the branding and finding the products and, just everything to do with it was absolute joy. Like, I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun.
That is good to hear. And I think the lesson that is inherent in what you're sharing is don't push it. Don't push it. Allow it. I mean, I think it's fair to say that, as I was touching on before, there's a lot of things we have to do in business that are not necessarily our sweet spot or our highest enjoyment spot. But if we are actually if the heart of our business is something that feels really good and falls into place, then those other things that have to be done are so much easier.
Yeah, they totally are.
Yeah.
But I think it's also about recognizing where your strengths are.
Totally.
And, you might be the sort of person who can do all sorts of things, but it's that age-old advice, isn't it? It might not be where your time is best spent, or, yes, you might be able to, for example, do all your copywriting or whatever, but is it going to be much quicker and easier to get someone else to do it? Is it going to be a struggle? Is it going to be a bit overwhelming to have to do it yourself? So it's really recognizing what are those pieces that you really actually want to do yourself and what can you outsource?
That's the property of discernment. We've been talking a lot about in the business masterminds that I run of discerning do I need to outsource this? Is this something that's in my genius zone? Is this something I want to do? Is this something I should do, et cetera, et cetera? So yeah, really good reminder. Thank you. I've noted that one as well. So the Meditation Hunter, there you go. I've revealed the name, is the business that stands today. So just tell us a little more about it and how it differs. Obviously, it's a totally different type of business to what you had before, but how does it feel different? How does it operate differently?
Yeah, it is very different. So, meditation was obviously a massive part for me in getting over the burnout. I tried a number of things over the years and nothing really worked for a number of different reasons. And look, meditation, it took a while for me to get into it because I was so busy and I was running so much on adrenaline that the very idea of having to sit still and do nothing for 20 minutes just seemed like a total waste of time. I had way too much to do. And so it took a while for it to really land with me. And, I had a teacher who I still work with today. And, what we used to do was I would Zoom in every morning at 5 or 5:30 in the morning and do meditation online with her and our group. And getting up at that time in the morning was totally the last thing that I wanted to do. And so it was always a struggle. And some mornings I did it and some mornings I just stayed in bed. And, but I really wanted to, I could already see the benefits of meditation and I wanted to get into it. And so what I did is I decided to create a really cool space within my home that I wanted to get out of bed and go and sit in to do my meditation Zoom call. And that kind of was when everything changed for me. I literally wanted to get out of bed and go and hang there. And that's really where the concept of the Meditation Hunter came from. So it's a collection, ever evolving, of products, both antique and modern artisan, just really unique things to inspire people to want to create a meditation space. So some of the antique pieces are, very much, they come from the Himalayas in Tibet and they've been used for 120, 30 years in meditation practice there. Beautiful old temple bells, like lots of really unique products. And then just some more modern things as well. But I've tried to find pieces that are really unique and that are going to make you want to sit in meditation. And look, everyone knows that you don't need things to meditate, but I'm very aware that for a lot of people when you're first starting, anything that you can do to make that space feel more grounded, that you want to keep going back there to meditate is super helpful. And particularly with the antique pieces, I very much believe that the items carry energy. And so, to be sitting in meditation and to have beautiful pieces next to you that have come from traditional meditation cultures and been used in practice there for 100+ years, I think, is pretty special.
I vouch for that with one of the pieces that I purchased from you, which I was setting up this morning, my little altar with the pieces on it. It does. I wanted to get out of bed and get upstairs. I think there's something to be said for ritual, whether it be a meditation ritual or ritual for different parts of your business and life. Like I have one before I start speaking with somebody on a podcast conversation. There is steps that I go through with preparing the space that I'm in. And I think it's an investment in yourself. It's valuing yourself. It's a display of your own self-worth that you are absolutely worth it to put this time, the space, the surroundings to support yourself. So it's as they say on one of those shows, it's a yes from me. And so with as we're coming full circle on this conversation, Sophie, what would you say to someone they feel at the moment that they're trapped? Like, this is the business I have. I don't have a right to feel bad about it. I mean, it's paying the bills. It's serving people. It's a good business. But I still have this kernel inside of like longing or yearning for something else. What would you say to someone that has that scenario at the moment?
There's a few things I would say. One is not to wait until kind of where I waited until where I was so burnt out that I just wanted to run away from it all, and I would have run away from it all. The second is, when you're incredibly overwhelmed and burnt out like that and feeling trapped, you can't think clearly. So to create space to be able to really think, however you do that, whether it's through meditation or it's, going away or working from a different space. Like I've got a friend who, recently has just switched up where she works from, and it's allowing her to just think very differently. And, there is always a way. We tell ourselves that there's not, but there always is a way. Every decision we make is a choice, and we can choose to continue to feel that there's no way out. But there is. But having said that, you can have people tell you, like I did. I had friends telling me for many years, you can sell the business, and I was like, no, I can't. I had this story going on. So I understand that for a lot of people, it's not a simple matter of talking to someone else and them saying, yep, there is a way out. You have to really believe it yourself. So what would my advice be in that situation? I think that the best thing you can do if you're in that sort of spot is to work on yourself and your own energy levels, whether that's through sleep or it's through, diet or whatever it might be, or just even your surroundings or who you're hanging out with, but just really focus on building yourself back up so you can actually think clearly and see the answers. Because the answers are there. It's just we get into places where we can't see them.
So it's really about challenging the stories and allowing yourself the energy and the space to face them and to challenge them.
And I think as well, I always have this thing where I go, okay, so what is actually the worst thing that could happen?
Yeah.
If I did close my business or do something else or whatever, what's the worst thing that can happen? And often it's not actually that bad.
Yeah. It's a great point, actually. I was having a conversation with someone yesterday about this and asking that question, does it matter in 5 days, 5 weeks, 5 months, 5 years, actually allowing yourself to move out and look at it as the future you? Because when you're immersed in something, it feels like it's just closed in around you and all those options are just not available. But when you breathe, give yourself a bit of space and ask those sort of questions, what's the worst that could happen? Or conversely, what's the best that could happen? So there's always questions to ask yourself.
I remember in the days just before I decided to sell, and I was sitting down with a friend of mine and I was saying, yeah, but if I sell, I'm not going to have any money and blah, 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 and how am I going to live? And she said to me, we sat down and did this exercise because, I have a lot of family in France, and it's always been on the bucket list to buy a place over there and to go and live there for a period of time. And we actually sat down, we worked out, okay, if the worst happened and I, ended up with very little money from the sale, how much would it actually cost me to go and live in a little village in France and, just exist over there and just have a simple life and, just really live simply? And actually, it wasn't going to cost that much at all. And so, we end up putting all this pressure on ourselves that we need X amount of money to be happy. But sometimes when you really break it down, you actually don't.
You're absolutely right. And that's where that question comes in, that every person needs to answer for themselves, which is how much is enough for me, for my situation, for the stage of life that I'm at. What do I actually need? So it was lovely that you had the clarity to, I guess, both trust yourself, which is incredibly important because at the end of the day, we are our safe harbor that we can fall back into. Also to see that, the very worst, inverted commas, could happen in a financial sense and I'd still be okay. I'd still be okay. Sophie, you've provided so many great examples and insights. This is what's so incredibly valuable. When someone else is considering a similar situation, they don't have access to the inside of somebody else's brain. So there's no opportunity to go, is what I'm experiencing, is this normal? Do other people think like this? You no longer have to walk around with this feeling of terminal uniqueness. So I really appreciate you being very candid and open about what was going through your head. It's really useful. And that idea of creating space and the ways in which we can give ourselves that grace. One part of that you and I touched on, we were talking about before we hit record, music can play a really big part in shifting our state. And I know it certainly does for me. If I get out of my office and I listen to something, that can shift me really quickly, which is why I'm asking all my guests on this season, what's a song that you'd want to add to the Next Chapter playlist? Something that has meaning for you, that can help somebody, shift their state. What's the song? And then again, what are the books? Because books can also give you a great opportunity to tap into another way of looking at things, a fresh perspective. So what would you like to share with us there?
Oh, songs. Yeah, that's a hard one because there are so many songs that, so much music that just switches that energy. But if I had to pick one that's been consistent for probably 25 years, it would be, and people either love this or hate this, but it would be the Dire Straits Sultans of Swing album. The first couple of tracks on there, which I'll have to look it up and tell you what they're called, because after listening to it for 25 plus years, I should know the names of the songs, but it's the first two on that album. And they just, there's just an energy about those two tracks that just doesn't matter if it's 6 o'clock in the morning and I'm driving to a meeting that I don't really want to go to, or it's, the end of the day, it just really energizes me. So that would be it from a musical point of view. From a book point of view, again, there are so many books that I could list, but one of the ones that I read, actually it was last year during COVID, which was quite different, but I absolutely loved, and it's a book called there's a castle in the south of France called Chateau Gudin, which is Gudanes. And it was an old kind of derelict castle that an Australian couple bought and started renovating a few years ago. And you can go and stay there and help with the renovations. But they put together a book, which I think you can buy it odd stockers here in Australia, or you can buy it off their website. And it's the story of how they came to be owners of the property and, just their journey through restoring it. And it's such a beautiful book from a visual point of view, but also, to see something so old come back to life. It's a beautiful book.
Oh, that's like the story of somebody that's bringing a dream to life, which really, when you think about it, it's what a lot of us are doing with our businesses in our next chapter, is we're feeling and seeing an idea that has potential for us, that really appeals to us. And then we go down, we go through that adventure of bringing it to life, of, painting the surfaces and putting a new window in and shaping that idea until it actually creates the business that fits us at this stage of life. So I think that's a wonderful suggestion.
And you know what, the owners of that castle, very innovative in that they bought this castle, and then they obviously had to restore it. And restoring a big old building like that is not a cheap exercise. But what they did is obviously this is pre-COVID, I'm not sure what's happening now, but you could go and stay there, but you would actually work on the property in exchange for staying there. So they found a way to get all this labour to help restore it from people who were just fascinated with the story and the building, in a way that wasn't going to cost them money, which I thought was a really innovative way. It's a good example that there is always a way of doing it. You just got to think a little differently.
So that's the mantra that we're using in association with this conversation. There is always a way. Just need the space and grace to allow those answers to float up to the surface. And I've just looked onto Spotify. Lady Writer.
Is that the first track?
That's the first track after Sultans of Swing. And, a lady writer, us women in business, writing our next chapters, it seems incredibly appropriate.
It does, doesn't it?
Well, so thank you so much for giving us your time today and those insights. As I was saying, really, really helpful for someone who is almost like I see it as I've got one foot on the land and one foot in the canoe. Which way am I going to go? And they feel stuck, and there needs to be a decision there, and giving yourself permission to make the decision that's going to fit and serve you and not burn you out, like you were saying. So thanks again. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure.
Wonderful. And to you, my lovely listener, again, my goal with these conversations is for you to find a piece within there that really speaks to you, that really resonates, that makes you realize that you're not alone. In fact, there are so many women and men, but we're talking about women right now, who are standing on that cusp. Shall I stop this? Shall I start that? Do I feel stuck? How can I make a different decision? To use that mantra, there's always a way, that Sophie shared with us today. There is definitely a way for you too. Just allow yourself that grace and that space. Give yourself room to breathe, and then let those answers start to float up. It might not be easy to put that idea into action, but if it's the one that keeps tapping you on the shoulder, then you need to turn around and look fully at it. Hear what it's got to say, and then ask yourself better questions. Rather than what could go wrong, why not try? Imagine if it went right. I'll leave you with that thought, and until we're together again on the podcast, take very good care.